When I look back on 1991, I kind of view that as the last really good year of the Hogan era for the WWF. And the funny thing about that year is, to me, WrestleMania 7 doesn't nearly, I think, get the respect or credit it deserves for the quality WrestleMania show that it was. And maybe that's because it moved from the LA Coliseum to the LA Sports Arena, and perhaps that's part of it. But I always felt that show, that WrestleMania, was criminally underrated. And I think another show that is criminally underrated in fans' minds is SummerSlam of 1991. That's back to back kind of major big pay per views, if you will, in terms of the big four. WrestleMania, SummerSlam. Both of these shows really delivered. This show was always fun for me to go back and watch. You had several good matches on this show. A lot of these matches had purpose. They had story to them, unlike maybe what happened with 1990. Like I said, this was a really good show. A damn good show. I don't know if it's necessarily one of the 5 best SummerSlams of all time, but maybe it deserves some consideration. Again, really criminally underrated. And it started off hot right away from the very beginning. Not an epic classic match, but the typical type of 6-man tag curtain jerker match that you would expect to set a good tempo and to set up the rest of the night very well. British Bulldog, Steamboat, and the Texas Tornado taking on the Warlord and Power and Glory. This was a solid opening pay-per-view 6-man tag match. This is really damn cool, especially going back and watching it and seeing the British Bulldog and Steamboat and Texas Tornado. Although when you go back and look at it, you realize that out of the 6 men in this match, only, I believe, 2 of them are still alive. No, 3 of them are still alive. That's kind of sad when you go back and think about it. Now, granted, that was 23 years ago, but that's still only 23 years ago. These are a lot of men that were in their 20s and 30s at the time. And out of the 6 of them that actually wrestled in this match, only Steamboat, the Warlord, and Paul Roma are still with us. It's kind of sobering when you think about it a little bit. I know they've talked about some stuff in the past. I've seen where people talked about the percentage of participants at WrestleMania 7 that are no longer with us. It was kind of sad when I went back and watched this match. I saw that half of the guys in this match are dead. But good, solid opening match. And it set the table nicely for the next match, an Intercontinental Championship bout between Bret Hart and Mr. Perfect. And here you go. You've got Bret Hart. You've got Mr. Perfect. I don't know why they ever put the fucking coach John Tolos with Mr. Perfect. That I'll never understand. I understood the dynamics of the genius Lanny Poffo and Mr. Perfect. That worked to me. I never understood the dynamics of putting the coach with Mr. Perfect. With that being said, even though Mr. Perfect wasn't in the best shape at this point in time, and even though he was being very crippled by his back injury, he went out there and did the job and made Bret Hart look like gold. This was a big opportunity for Bret Hart. He was really starting to break out on his own. He was starting to sit there and get the company at least a little bit behind him and saying, hey, this could be somebody for the future as we head towards the 90s. And here you are, Mr. Perfect, the perfect place, the perfect time for this match. And it was a really damn good match at that. A match that's often talked about maybe as one of the 10 best SummerSlam matches of all time, and who am I to disagree with it? It's a phenomenal match with 2 phenomenal workers, and what more can you really say about it? Even when you look back at like the Natural Disasters and the Bushwhackers, the match was there, sure. It got some time. The Bushwhackers are always fucking funny to go back and watch. Then you got the $1 Million Championship match between Virgil and Ted DiBiase, and people can make all the cracks and jokes they want about Virgil, and all of them are true. But there is no question that after all that time of Virgil being Ted DiBiase's manservant, that the crowd was really behind Virgil, at least in the context of his feud and rivalry with Ted DiBiase. And this shit really worked. This match got a lot of time, almost maybe too much time. But DiBiase did the best he could to make Virgil look good. And this, again, the dynamics of it, the story that led into it. You're talking about 3+ years of story getting to this match. You just don't get that type of stuff in today's WWE. There's no question about it. And again, a match that was perfectly positioned in the card. The dynamics worked, and the match really worked. One of my favorite big-time pay-per-view matches of all time from the WWF in terms of sheer comedy gold and entertainment value has to be the jailhouse match between the Big Boss Man and the fucking Mountie. They were incredible. The stipulation of this is whoever lost the match had to spend 24 hours in a New York City jail. And this fucking ruled this whole damn show as far as I'm concerned until the very end. Fucking the Mountie made this work. When they're sitting there and they're booking him and taking his fingerprints and locking him up behind the bars, Mountie's going off. This shit was incredible. This is the type of unique, fun type of stuff that you used to get from time to time from the WWF back in the day. I wish they could do this type of stipulation match again because this shit was awesome. Maybe it just worked because it was the big boss man and the fucking Mountie. I don't know, but god damn, this is always a lot of fun for me to go back and watch. Whenever I know I'm going to go back and watch SummerSlam 91, I can't wait to see the fucking jailhouse match. But then, of course, you had the street fight for the tag team championships between the Legion of Doom and the Nasty Boys. And, of course, obviously being a big-time LOD mark, if I can figure out how to point, yeah, there you go, over there. See all that LOD stuff right there? Probably would have been just easier to do it that way. Yeah, probably would have. You could obviously tell that I was excited about this. Hey, again, another highlight to this show as far as I was concerned. Not the classic type of tag team title match that you got from, let's say, the Hart Foundation and Demolition, but it still worked for the participants that were involved and, again, spoke to the depth of the tag team division of the WWF at that time. And then you kind of get to the whole theme of this SummerSlam 1991, which was a match made in hell and a match made in heaven. And you've got Hogan and Warrior taking on Slaughter and his team of Iraqis, Adnan and Mustafa. And again, this match is what it is. You have to understand the backdrop of the times. You got to understand, you know, the very nationalistic tone in the country in 1991 coming out of the Persian Gulf War. You know, the dynamics of this worked to a degree. The always interesting story about this event is that Ultimate Warrior held Vince hostage. He sent him out there to wrestle the match, and then when he came backstage, he fired his ass. That's always interesting. You know, that's always one of those things that you think about when you think about SummerSlam 1991. But, you know, I always wish that if there's one thing looking back to that time that I always wish they would have been able to do, a Hogan Warrior rematch for the belt maybe at WrestleMania 8. You know, if you weren't going to do Flair and Hogan there. You know, you didn't know maybe at this time that you were actually going to have Flair in the fold in the summer of 91. But, you look at this. I kind of wish I could have done a different type of Mega Powers dynamic here with Hogan and Warrior. Would have been pretty cool to me as a kid, I'm just saying. But, you know, the match worked. You know, Hogan had his moment. Warrior had his moment, and it's skip and whoop-de-woo. But then you get to what was really the feature attraction, the main event of this show, as it should have been, because nothing else could compete with this and nothing else could follow it. And it's one of those things, as an older wrestling fan, as somebody that grew up during that time frame, you know, I always go back and watch this, and it's now very sad and tragic, but it also brings back a lot of happy memories as well, and that is the match made in heaven, the on-screen marriage ceremony between the Macho Man Randy Savage and Miss Elizabeth. And, you know, to the fans that sit there and think that the only thing that ever matters is the in-ring components, well, you're a fucking moron. Because this is the type of shit here that can transcend and mean more than anything else that could happen via any flips, kicks, punches, or throws, or hurls, or anything else like that at all. This, to me, you know, still means something to me 23 years later, because, again, this is something that had been building up for years, you know, when Elizabeth was used as Savage's, you know, heat magnet, if you will, and he was always talking down to Elizabeth, and he was treating her like trash and doo-doo. You're sitting there and you're like, how could you do that to Miss Elizabeth? She's so beautiful. You could see, and after a point in time, you're like, you could see she really loves you, Savage. Why in the fuck would you do this? Why would you align yourself with freaking Sherry? It's about Elizabeth. Damn it, can't you see this? And then you get to WrestleMania 7, and you have that phenomenal retirement match between Warrior and Savage. And then what happens after Savage loses the match? Sherry kind of turns on him, and then out comes Miss Elizabeth to throw Sherry out of the ring, and you get that great culmination moment right there. You know, it gets me a little bit emotional thinking about it, not just because of the fact that those two are no longer with us. It's because of what it meant. It's because of what it represented. It's because of the journey of the story to get to that point, to get to this ceremony here at SummerSlam 1991. For any wrestling fan that alleges to call themselves a wrestling fan that wants to shit on this pay-per-view, and in particular the way they close this show, then shame on you. Then shame on you. What type of wrestling fan are you really? I mean, again, this had years and years of story to it. And maybe younger fans, to be fair to a lot of you, you don't get it and you don't understand it because you didn't live it and you didn't experience it. And that's not your fault, and that's fine. But the older fans like me that actually, didn't find out about this from historical standpoint or going back and watching stuff, but actually watching stuff live as it happened, living this story for years and years, it meant the world to us to see Macho Man and Miss Elizabeth finally get married after all that time. And it was the perfect kind of send-off for this very good and criminally underrated SummerSlam 1991. This show had a lot of things going for it. You had several good storylines heading into it. You had several good matches on the show. And then you look at all the cast of characters that you had on this freaking card. And then you look at the way the show ended and the journey and the path to get to that singular ceremony, that seminal moment. One of my favorite SummerSlams of all time. Not my favorite, though. Perhaps my favorite SummerSlam of all time is next year's SummerSlam, and that, of course, is the legendary event that was SummerSlam 1992.